that's the unfortunate part about Colorado. It's becoming kind of like an amusement park that we have to have times to go on a natural mountain.
I think that, you know, somewhere along the line, climbing 14ers went from sort of an avocation of mountaineers and climbers to a very mainstream bucket list type thing. These are very unforgiving places. Climbing is oftentimes referred to as long periods of sheer boredom interspersed with brief moments of sheer terror.
I think a lot of the popular 14ers, the ones with good access to the Front Range and I-70 corridor, are getting overcrowded. And I don't think it's a sudden overnight problem.
Hiking Colorado's most popular 14er is no longer free, at least not in the summertime when the trail is most accessible to most hikers. When I heard that Summit County would be charging $50 to park at the Quandary Trailhead and selling $15 tickets to the once free shuttle, I decided I needed to plan a final, solitary, free hike to the peak before the new rules had a chance to kick in. Quandary is just the latest domino to fall as more gates start going up, more restrictions take effect, and popular peaks start to feel more like tourist attractions. Welcome to the Alpine Amusement Park, where you need tickets for the trail, mountaintops resemble skyscraper observation decks, and hikers brave Disney-like crowds instead of the rugged outdoors. The only things missing here are the turnstiles. Of course, these restrictions are all done in the name of conservation and safety. The sheer number of hikers on the trail is damaging the environment, overwhelming rescue crews. At least, this is the story that we've been sold as the reasoning behind a lot of these programs. I wanted to be sure, so I decided to go directly to the source, talking to the trail builders, rescue groups, and the planners behind these policies to see if anything else could be done to protect our trails without restricting access. What I learned came as a shock to me, and I think it's going to surprise you as well. The sheer serenity at the Grays and Torreys trailhead seems almost unreal after the bumpy ride up Stevens Gulch. Lloyd Athern, director of the Colorado 14ers Initiative, is here to get an update on one of CFI's projects shoring up the trail.
When CFI started this journey back in 1994, it's important to point out there were only two planned trails on the 14ers, the Keyhole route on Longs Peak and the Bar Trail on Pikes Peak. All of the other routes that people were using to climb the 14ers were literally trampled into the tundra by climbers, usually taking as direct a route as they could from trailhead to summit.
2 decades later, CFI is working backwards, turning bushwhacks into real, sustainable trails. Because the better the trail is, the more visitors it can handle.
People oftentimes equate volume of use with degree of impact, and a bad trail that's unplanned without a lot of sustainability to it can have a small number of people with a huge amount of impact. And meanwhile, if you really like this Grays and Torreys trail, if we're able to really harden it, it'll be able to handle a huge amount of use.
The first challenge comes from knowing which trails actually need this level of attention.
When I took on this job 13 years ago, there was an inherited number of 500,000 people on the 14ers. And I just thought, well, that's weird. And when I started pushing for what was the methodology, how did they get it, you know, it seemed like it was put together with, you know, duct tape and balls of string.
Lloyd hit the trail with a tally counter to solve the problem the old-fashioned way. He said he'd run into a few dozen people each day. That tipped him off to the fact that the 500,000 figure probably wasn't even in the ballpark. To get a better idea, CFI deployed these. They're small infrared counting devices, and they're used at choke points. They measure every time a person walks by, and the data shows that Grays and Torreys saw between 30 and 35,000 visitors in 2020, making it one of the most popular routes in Colorado. CFI ranks the conditions of all trails under its purview. During the last several years, Grays and Torreys has actually degraded from a D- to an F. The lower part of the trail, that's not the problem. It's built on the bones of an old mining road and remains in pretty good shape. The upper segment is what needs hardening. Here, there are no shrubs or retaining walls to pen in hikers, which can help cause destructive trail widening. You may have spotted signs like these cropping up in open spaces where some trails have doubled or even tripled in width over the last few hiking seasons. On our hike up, Lloyd points out a similar problem. It's called trail grading.
These are the continual things that we have to deal with on these, especially the peaks that get a lot of use.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, sort of newer climbers. So very clearly this is the trail.
Yes.
Right? So like, why are you going down here?
Yep.
Why are you cutting off there? You know, is it that there are people coming up? Like, even at that spot right before where the creek crossing would be.
Yeah.
Here we see the woman who then has to get and step off to the side of the trail on the tundra because, I mean, we got like a 4-foot wide trail here.
Stepping off a tundra trail brings serious damage to the ecosystem. It's actually home to some plant life so rare that one careless footfall could potentially wipe out an entire species.
I've been on projects with botanists where we've been looking at where we're going to put a new route in, and they're finding things that haven't been inventoried in the botanical literature. Or it's like, oh, this is one of like 5 or 10 clumps of this plant that ever has been identified. You might be trashing a Van Gogh that is one of a kind.
These plants are also the only vegetation growing this high up, and this actually poses a challenge for those CFI build crews. They depend on nearby material to build those trails, so with no trees, there are no logs, and that means that there's a huge shortage of supplies for making natural erosion breaks. Luckily, they've been able to come up with and deploy some very creative solutions.
Morning.
Hi guys. Yeah, project's going well.
These are the members of CFI's trail crew. Here on Grays and Tories, they hike in these big spools of wire mesh, then shape the mesh into cages called gabions.
The trails look so nice.
Working together, the crew then fills the gabions with smaller rocks to make bigger erosion barriers.
Trying to have the front faces be fairly aesthetic, and we're starting to run out of those rocks too.
These don't just hold the trail together, they help keep hikers on the right path. This is one of the big ways trail impact can be reduced, even in places where use is skyrocketing. For example, let's go back to Quandary Peak. Quandary has seen visitor numbers more than double since 2015. The reason that I throw that out as a number is because it's the first year that CFI had dependable data on after they deployed the trail counters. Now, over the same period, Quandary's condition has actually improved, and significantly. Over those few years, it went from a C all the way up to an A- in the CFI ranking system. And keep in mind too, that's with an extra 30,000 visitors per year on that trail. I cannot state this enough. This is a fact that goes completely against a lot of the reporting and conventional wisdom that you've probably heard on this issue. So if there is a hard cap on how many visitors Quandary can accommodate, it's got nothing to do with the amount of boots on the ground. Summit County actually reached this conclusion in its recent visitor management plan. And that's not to say that hikers don't have an impact, far from it.
People are wandering off trail, if their dogs are chasing pikas and marmots, and they've got a hatchet and they're cutting down trees for a fire, you know, a lot more impact can occur by a small number of people.
It's just the number of people on those hardened trails is much less important than how those visitors actually behave. Besides, not every trail has been shored up to handle that much activity. Lloyd is concerned that restrictions on popular peaks could scatter hikers across thousands of other, smaller mountains with more vulnerable infrastructure.
Isn't it better all around to get people on trails that are easy to follow? There is probably some level of safety in numbers if something happens here, rather than just having people willy-nilly going through untrailed areas without the experience to do it.
And as it turns out, yes it is.
A lot of times, there's so many people up there, they'll just crowd rescue the person, and we don't even have to go.
Anna DeBattiste is with the Colorado Search and Rescue Association and the Summit County Rescue Group. That's the team responding to the state's most popular 14er.
We get both injury calls and lost party calls on Quandary. The trends in recent years, I would say, are more lost people in the winter.
With data showing these trails are mostly capable of handling high numbers of guests, the next logical question is, are the search and rescue teams?
We have always seen a trend toward people not taking 14ers seriously enough and not being prepared. A lot of the guidebooks say that Quandary is one of the easiest 14ers in the state, and that's true. but only in relative terms. It doesn't mean it's actually easy.
Much like with trail use capacity, it's less about how many visitors there are and more about how well those visitors prepare. Anna gave me a recent example from a summer call. Parents became separated from their adult son on the south side of Quandary.
They had been hiking up to the waterfall above Blue Lakes on the south side of Quandary, and they lost the son. He was wearing chacos, shorts, a t-shirt. He had no backpack, no food, no water, no supplies whatsoever. It was a beautiful day. He was lucky the sun was out. It never got too cold. But if he had been out much longer, it's always going to be cold on Quandary at night, even if it's July.
This impact is the same on other popular 14ers too, especially ones within easy reach of the metro.
It's not how many people are on these mountains, it's just how many people are having a bad day on those mountains. We only see the people that get lost or get injured.
We tend to see a lot more of the inexperienced people getting hurt.
Dawn and Steve Wilson are part of the Alpine rescue team, the group responsible for popular spots like Mount Bierstadt and Gray's and Torrey's peaks. They're dealing with the same problem identified by CFI and the Summit County Rescue Group. That's hikers trying to tackle these challenges without the gear, training, or knowledge needed to make that trip safe.
The peak bagging, social media, get your picture with the name of the 14er and the altitude of it is absolutely one of the reasons why we have 120 missions a year now.
Here's how the theory goes. If you're on the trail to enjoy nature, having to turn back early for bad-looking weather or another problem, it just isn't a big deal. But if you're determined to get proof you made it to the top...
We have missions because people try to get to the top to take that picture, even if they have altitude sickness or they're injured or lightning is coming, and that puts their life in jeopardy. And so that's one of our educational messages too, is it's not worth your injury or your life just to get the picture on the peak.
You may push yourself much harder than you should, overstay, or get caught out in dangerous conditions.
You may see us in 12 hours, not 3. Keep that in mind when you're gonna push that extra 1,000 feet for the picture.
If trail restrictions and closures have reduced the number of rescue calls, it's not a trend that rescue teams have been able to measure just yet. Although, the Summit County Rescue Group says it has made it easier to get their emergency equipment up to the trailhead parking lot and stage for these bigger rescues. That takes us to the real bottleneck: parking. If you've been up to one of these popular peaks, I don't need to tell you how big of a problem parking has become. And if you haven't had to deal with this, know that arriving basically any time after 5 in the morning on a popular weekend, it can be a coin toss whether you get a space at all. No matter how good a job the 14ers initiative does, or how courteous and well-prepared the hikers are, they have to get to that trail somehow. Remember back when Lloyd said,
all of the other routes that people were using to climb the 14ers were literally trampled into the tundra by climbers, usually taking as direct a route as they could from trailhead to summit.
Well, those first hikers certainly weren't planning for future parking. Back then, most of the hiking was being done by serious mountaineers, and there weren't that many of them. As demand grew, though, there wasn't much room to fit more cars without parking on top of the wildlife, on private property, in the way of rescue vehicles, or just in a dangerous spot. Quandary Peaks Trailhead has this problem. It's overtaken all the other 14ers in terms of popularity, and it's not hard to see why. There's a ton of pull factors at work here. Easy access, a relatively tame hike, and then there's the snowball factor. The more people who hike and take pictures of the peak, the more visible the mountain is. Other people are going to scroll through social media, see those pictures, and do the hike themselves. Then they're going to share their own images, and even more people are going to be able to see the peak. It creates this cycle of new waves of hikers who want to recreate that experience that they've seen, and as the cycle continues, it draws more and more visitors to the mountain. Summit County government picked up on this and realized that it had a big problem on its hands.
The intent was for the plan to be more fully complete and adopted before we took any action, but that just wasn't an alternative based on the urgency that was given us by the board.
Assistant County Manager Bentley Henderson says growing safety concerns pushed them to do just something. Things came to a head when so many cars were double parked along the road to the trailhead, an emergency vehicle actually could not get through. Early in the 2021 season, the county announced there would be paid parking reservations at the trailhead, and if you didn't want to pay, a free shuttle would tap into the existing public transportation system down in Breckenridge. Because the reservation system only helped foot the bill and couldn't cover the entire cost, the county decided to make the shuttle paid as well. Tickets cost $15 per rider, and you need to buy them in advance and show them to board. The parking pay structure has changed too. They switched to an on-peak, off-peak style, which means that you'll pay more when the trailhead is crowded on holidays or weekends, and you'll pay a little bit less on days when fewer people are hiking.
We still had people that were upset over having to pay, and we still had people that drove up and parked on the roads. But I think that the problem was marginalized quite a bit in terms of full-on crowding of the road and creating those bottlenecks for emergency services.
Keep in mind here, I spoke with the assistant county manager before these changes were announced, but we still have a lot of data from the pilot program's first year, and we can use that to draw conclusions about how effective this shuttle actually is. I reached out to Summit Express, the company that ran the shuttle. According to their records, they moved about 12,000 people from the airport lot down in Breckenridge up to the trailhead. I don't have an exact figure for the number of people who drove and then parked instead, but thanks to some records from the county, we can actually make some pretty decent estimates. We know the total number of people who made parking reservations and the number of people who got tickets. 3,575. Again, this is according to data from the pilot program. Of course, that number assumes that every car headed to the trailhead is only carrying one person, and we know that's not true. Lots of people hike in groups, and some of those groups are quite big. Luckily, I found an answer to this problem as well, and it was buried in the county's Transportation and Visitor Use Management Action Plan. This is basically just a lot of research the county did before rolling out the pilot program. And in that research, they conducted a lot of surveys of the hikers who were showing up to do Quandary Peak. One of the questions asked verbatim is, how many people are in your personal vehicle today? The overwhelming majority of hikers wound up answering that they came in groups of between 2 and 4 people, averaging out to 2.5 hikers per car. If we multiply that number by the amount of cars that actually bought a reservation or got a ticket, we get 8,938 hikers. I think this number is an overestimate. I don't have a way to count groups that made a reservation and then no-showed at the last minute. I also think it's possible that some groups used a half-day ticket option, got back late, and still got a ticket. This would have double counted them in the system. But this doesn't change the conclusion, and here's why. If the goal was to ease safety concerns by clearing the road to the trailhead, mission accomplished. By our estimates, the program got 57% of vehicles away from the trailhead road and kept them down in Breckenridge. Even if our calculations are off, the error would mean fewer hikers drove to the trailhead, and proportionately more of them took the shuttle. And that means a lot less cars are veering off, widening the road, and possibly crushing wildlife.
If you park on the side of the road that, you might be driving over something that we don't want to have folks driving over, or if there are social trails being created because people have to park a long ways from a trailhead parking area and they want to take a shortcut to the trail, we want to try to get people to understand that we don't want to create a lot of non-conforming trails.
Of course, this does come at a cost. There's the convenience lost for some neighbors who just want fee-free access to local trailheads, and then there's the tangible cost of running the shuttle, whether that's paid for by county taxpayers, or by the ticket holders on the shuttle, or the parking pass holders driving up to the trailhead. That has to be determined by the county. The peak management plan also looked at a couple other scenarios too. One involved expanding this lot and adding more parking lanes along the road up, but their best case scenario would still be strained under the visitor numbers we're seeing right now. This means in a season or two, we'll probably be back here just trying to solve the exact same problem. It also seems like the county has committed itself to going down this road and is already thinking about expanding the shuttle system beyond Quandary to include other popular trails.
Those other trailheads will be looked at so that the shuttle becomes more of a more comprehensive trail access program than just Quandary. We're trying to look at how we can take advantage of it across the county at all of our trailheads.
The assistant county manager brought up the Gold Hill and Dredge trails as potential candidates. This expansion really would be an Alpine amusement park, a big visitor hub with a network of outdoor attractions attached. And this made me wonder what the impact would be if local governments just hard committed, took the plunge, and started running these places like actual tourist spots. Could treating the popular peaks and trails like theme park attractions actually save them? It would certainly be viable from a commercial standpoint. Let's refer back to a 2009 study from Colorado State University. They took a look at how much money a single hiker climbing Quandary Peak brought to the local economy. If we adjust the numbers a bit for inflation, the average visitor spends about $359 on food, gas, gear, lodging, and retail. If we expand that to the whole year and all of the tourists, Quandary Peak alone brings in more than $16.1 million to Summit County every single year.
We're finding that the trail itself has the capacity, and I know that the Forest Service is very interested in making sure that people can have those experiences, and so they are confident that the shuttle running at basically full capacity is not going to overrun the trail capacity.
It probably would effectively address the parking bottleneck, but how would this impact the experience? And could the approach even work at other 14ers? The second question is easier to answer with a simple no. The factors that make Quandary such a popular spot also make it uniquely suited for this solution. There's a nearby town with a large lot and an existing transportation network to tap into. Bierstadt is close enough to Georgetown that a shuttle probably could work, but the town lacks the space needed to build a massive parking lot like the one that Breckenridge depends on to make its shuttle run well. Brazen Torreys is close to the highway, but far from a town that could actually support a shuttle system at all. And the same parking lot limits exist at the lower lot just off of I-70. You'd also need to find a shuttle bus that's actually capable of making it up Stevens Gulch, which is a pretty tall order considering the condition of the road. The DeCalibron Loop is already involved with a difficult struggle for access over land ownership issues, and I think you'd have a hard time convincing a local government to add further development to this area while it's already in this property access battle. As we go farther down the list, we find mountains that are either more remote or lack the pull factors that make the others so crowded. It's hard to translate what works on one peak to the others. There's also the argument that more development could lead to a greater assumption of safety and less prepared hikers.
Well, we've tried to encourage people to utilize all of the tools that are available to them, such as 14ers Initiative that offers that kind of insight. I know that the Forest Service websites talk about climbing late in the afternoon. So, we're hoping that folks will utilize some of the resources that are available so they can understand and make good decisions on their own behalf.
Do you know where the top is?
Unfortunately, though, many hikers already don't take advantage of all the available resources they have to prepare, and attitudes have been trending in this direction for a while now.
These peaks are so well known, they're so accessible and approachable, that you get people who will come from all other parts of the country. They don't necessarily know how our weather systems work. They probably haven't had a lot of time at altitude to know how they're going to do physiologically. And despite a wealth of information on route guides and phone apps and all sorts of different things, you oftentimes have people who just haven't put a lot of forethought into where they're going, what it's going to be like, what they need to be prepared for.
As Lloyd points out, mountaineering is inherently dangerous. The bigger question always is, are you prepared if things don't go according to plan?
These are very unforgiving places. You know, climbing is oftentimes referred to as long periods of sheer boredom interspersed with brief moments of sheer terror. Everything can really turn on you quickly. And I oftentimes think, okay, you've got enough stuff if everything goes right. But what happens if everything doesn't go right?
At this point, I know that I've pointed out a lot of problems without actually bringing up some solutions. So let's address that. What can we actually do to solve the problems facing our peaks and trails? We don't want new hikers in the community to feel they're getting a fully safe, controlled experience, but having people trample the wildlife and park willy-nilly in the way of rescue vehicles clearly isn't ideal either. The truth is, we were doomed to this fate the day these trails were first beaten into the tundra. Now we're left with big problems and little space to solve them in. The first part of this solution has to be in the hands of lawmakers. The need for outdoor recreation will continue to grow, and as we set aside new open spaces, we should be future-proofing them. That's going to mean parking lots away from private property and utility access, and roads that can easily accommodate emergency vehicles and shuttles. The 14ers initiative is already hard at work on the second piece of the puzzle. That's hardening up the popular trails rather than trying to just encourage hikers to move elsewhere.
Shouldn't we try to meet the people where they are? And, you know, if they want to climb 14ers, let's improve the 14er trails so that they can be more robust and handle the use that they're getting. Leave the 13ers and 12ers for the people who might have climbed 14ers years ago and they're looking for a more primitive solitude experience.
Predicting human behavior, Lloyd argues, is a fool's errand. Provided the hiking community exercises good habits, these popular trails may never hit any kind of foot traffic capacity limit. And that brings me to the last issue, and it's one that can only be solved by the hiking community itself. Taking better care of the outdoors. I know it's cliche, but we've learned these systems aren't overwhelmed by large numbers of people, they're overwhelmed by small numbers of people behaving badly and irresponsibly. These are steps we can all take to reduce our impact to our favorite trails. Don't pull off the road to park, stay on the trail, pack out your garbage and waste, leash your pets, prepare and pack smart, follow good camping and campfire rules, and overall, just be a good steward for the outdoors. Fixing this problem would be so much easier if it just involved putting up bigger and bigger parking lots. But the most important change really does need to be in the mindset of the outdoor community.
One year, all of a sudden, signs showed up, and another year, you know, all of a sudden there were mountain bikers who wanted to mountain bike the non-wilderness 14ers. And remember one summer there was a guy who wanted to hula hoop on top of all of the 14ers, right? So again, somewhere it got a little bit off the rails and a little bit just sort of this is a thing that people do.
We have to get back to this idea of experiential rather than list-based hiking. Focus on having a great time, not just reaching the summit, and being okay with the idea of turning back when necessary.
The one thing that isn't going to change is the mountain. The mountain will be here tomorrow, it'll be here next week, it'll be here in a year. There's plenty of time to not risk your life today.
The hardest challenge is probably going to be overcoming a common instinct that a lot of us share, trying to hoard cool locations from public knowledge in the hopes that this will somehow protect them from being destroyed. It won't. Gatekeeping almost always backfires. The best thing we can do for these trails is to pass on our love for the outdoors and the idea that every step is special, not just the final one that we plant on the summit.